on to Barrett's esophagus now. So another red hot topic. The last 2019 NEET, about 6 to 7 questions were directly asked from Barrett's esophagus. So please concentrate. So what is Barrett's esophagus? So Barrett's esophagus is nothing but a replacement of stratified squamous epithelium at the lower end of the esophagus by columnar epithelium. So just it's a metaplasia where one epithelium is replaced by another epithelium. Here the stratified squamous epithelium of the lower end of the esophagus is replaced by a columnar epithelium. Okay, it was named after Norman Barrett, an Australian surgeon. So epidemiology, commonly seen in middle age or older individuals, approximately 55 years of age. The average age of occurrence is 55, and it's very rare in less than 10 years and extremely rare in individuals less than 5 years. More commonly seen in males than females. It's uncommon in blacks and Asians. So this is the epidemiological factors. So commonly seen in middle age to older population, approximate average age of occurrence is 55 years, extremely rare in children, especially less than 5 years, more common in males and uncommon in blacks and Asians. So what are the risk factors? The most important risk factor is chronic GERD, obesity, smoking, and to lesser extent alcohol. So as you know, as we have already discussed, there is an inverse association between H. pylori and Barrett's esophagus. So if there is an active H. pylori infection in the stomach, there is less chance of formation of Barrett's metaplasia. Okay. So coming to the cancer risk. So what is the risk of Barrett's esophagus progressing into adenocarcinoma? It's about 0.13 to 0.33% per year. So on an average it is 0.25% per year. So this was asked in November 19 AIMS, the risk of adenocarcinoma in Barrett's esophagus, the cancer risk. So it's about 0.25% per year. So coming to the diagnosis, so how do you make a diagnosis of Barrett's esophagus? First step is on endoscopy, you need to recognize the gastric folds, and you need to know the most proximal extent of this gastric fold. Okay, so first step to recognize Barrett's is to identify the most proximal extent of the gastric fold, and next thing is to identify a columnar epithelium about 1 centimeter beyond this most proximal extent. So first you identify a gastric fold, the most prominent extent. Okay, and next thing is identify whether the columnar epithelium has extended 1 centimeter beyond this proximal extent of gastric fold. Okay, so as you can see in this endoscopic figure, this is the most proximal extent of gastric fold, and from this gastric fold normally you don't expect the gastric mucosa to be present in the esophagus. So this is the esophageal mucosa replaced by a red or pink columnar epithelium. Okay, So the most important histological criteria for Barrett's is presence of intestinal metaplasia with goblet cells. So actually it's the columnar epithelium can be either a gastric epithelium or an intestinal epithelium, but now the consensus is that you need to have an intestinal type of epithelium with the presence of goblet cells. That's when you call it as a Barrett's esophagus. Okay. Moving on, there's something called as Prague staging that you do to identify the extent of Barrett's mucosa. So first thing is make sure that there's a hiatus hernia. Okay. So if there's a hiatus hernia, it can cause confusion in recognizing the lower end of esophagus. Okay, lower end of esophagus. So how do you recognize the lower end of esophagus in the presence of hiatus hernia? You need to identify the proximal extent of gastric folds. As you can see, the gastric folds will not extend beyond lower ischial sphincter. So if the gastric folds are ending, that's where the lower ischial sphincter present. So first thing is to identify the lower ischial sphincter. Okay. The next thing is look for a displacement of squamo-columnar junction above the GE junction. First you recognize the GE junction, then you look for displacement of the squamo-columnar junction. The squamo-columnar junction normally should end at LES, but if it is extending beyond this, look for the displacement. Okay. So measure the depth of endoscopic incision at the proximal circumferential extent of suspected columnar metaplasia. So this is the area. This is the area, this is the circumferential extent. Okay. So this is about 33 centimeter. 33 centimeters. So circumferential extent is about 33 centimeters. And then measure the depth of endoscopic incision, the maximal extent. So this is the maximal extent, which is about 29 centimeter. Okay. So now we have a circumferential extent. Circumferential extent is this is actually this is the distance from the incisors. Okay. This 36, 34, 32, everything is from the incisors. So now you subtract this 33 from 36, you get 3 centimeter, that is C3, and subtract this 29 from this 36, you get 7 centimeter. So it is C7. So this Barrett's epithelium or Barrett's metaplasia is staged as C3, C7. That means its circumferential extent is 3 centimeter and its maximal extent is 7 centimeter. So I'll revisit this once again. The first most important thing is to identify if there's any presence of hiatus hernia or not. If there is an hiatus hernia, you need to identify the most proximal extent of gastric folds. That will give you the lower ischial sphincter, which is about 36 centimeter from the incisors. The next thing is you need to locate the circumferential extent or the deepest part of the displacement, that is circumferential extent. Note down the extent. The next thing is go for the maximal or maximal extent of the Barrett's epithelium from the LES. Note down the extent and subtract it from 36. That will give you the circumferential and the maximal extent. Okay. Circumferential, maximal extent. So this is C3, M7. So this is how a Barrett's epithelium is staged by Prague staging. Okay. This can be asked in upcoming examination. So coming to the cancer pathways in Barrett's esophagus, how a Barrett's epithelium will convert itself into a cancer. So there are two important pathways: metaplastic Barrett cells going into the traditional pathway and ultimately leading to cancer cell, and one more pathway is genome doubled pathway. The traditional pathway, the initial step is P53 inactivation. In traditional pathway, it will lead to P16 inactivation, leading to genomic instability and ultimately cancer cell. Whereas in new genome doubled pathway, there is a duplication of the genome which lead to genomic instability and ultimately cancer cell. So this genomic instability or genome double pathway has a higher rate of cancer progression than the traditional path. Coming to the natural history of Barrett's esophagus, the non-dysplastic Barrett's esophagus can convert into adenocarcinoma at the rate of 0.25% per year. This we have already discussed. Again, this non-dysplastic Barrett esophagus turning out into low-grade dysplasia occurs at about 4.3% per year. This non-dysplastic Barrett esophagus going in for high-grade dysplasia occurs in about 0.9% per year. Okay, remember the high-grade dysplasia can convert into adenocarcinoma and the rate of conversion is about 6% per year. These facts are very important. This was asked in AIMS November 2019 and also in the last year's NEET. Okay, so it's very important to remember this natural history of Barrett's esophagus. Coming to the management of Barrett's esophagus. So as we know that GERD is the main risk factor for Barrett's esophagus, optimum management of GERD is very important. They should be given PPIs once daily, and they should be treated irrespective of symptoms of GERD. This is very important. So moment you diagnose Barrett's metaplasia, whether the patient is having reflux or not, or heartburn or not, have to put them on proton pump inhibitors to prevent the further episodes of reflux and preventing the metaplasia getting converted into adenocarcinoma. Okay. And important thing is anti-reflux surgery. Is there any role of anti-reflux surgery to prevent Barrett's esophagus? No. The answer is no. Currently, there is no role of anti-reflux surgery just to prevent the progression of Barrett's esophagus into adenocarcinoma. Okay. Is there any role of aspirin in Barrett's epithelium or Barrett's metaplasia? No. Previously, there was a confusing consensus that aspirin, just like prevention of the polyps converting into adenocarcinoma in colon. So right now there is no evidence to say that aspirin prevents the progression of Barrett's epithelium into the adenocarcinoma. So currently aspirin is not recommended. Okay, screening of general population. Do you have to screen the general population for Barrett's epithelium? No. It is recommended for only certain group of individuals, such as those with history of chronic GERD, those who are more than 50 years, male gender, obesity, white race, history of Barrett's or adenocarcinoma of esophagus in first degree relative. So this has been recommended by American College of Gastroenterology, okay, British Society of Gastroenterology, and American Society of Gastrointestinal Endoscopy. So these are the current guidelines for you to screen for Barrett's epithelium. Moving on, coming to the definitive treatment for Barrett's esophagus. So this is called endoscopic eradication therapy. So what is the principle behind EET? So here what they do is, you are basically ablating or destroying the Barrett's epithelium. So destroying the Barrett's epithelium by using different techniques, and you put them on PPI and allow the epithelium to regrow back. Allow the epithelium to regrow back over the destroyed epithelium. So this is the basic principle of endoscopic eradication therapy. Mind you, you should use this technique only if the lesions are confined to mucosa. If the Barrett's epithelium or the Barrett's metaplasia or Barrett's dysplasia is confined only to the mucosa, but if it is extending into the submucosa, there is no role of endoscopic eradication therapy. There are certain exceptions, we will not go into the details of it, but just remember endoscopic eradication therapy is restricted only for mucosal lesions. not for the lesions which has extended into the submucosa. So we have two forms of endoscopic eradication therapy. One is endoscopic ablative therapy and second thing is endoscopic resection. So in endoscopic ablative therapy, what they do is, so they'll ablate the epithelium. So which are the different techniques that are available to ablate the epithelium? We have heat therapy, we have cold therapy, and we have a photodynamic therapy. So what is heat therapy? Basically you are generating heat by different forms like laser, argon plasma coagulation. Cold therapy, you use cryotherapy. And photodynamic therapy, you inject a photodynamic chemical that will get localized into the esophageal epithelium, and from outside you give a electrical therapy that will stimulate the singlet oxygen within that photodynamic molecule, and ultimately it will ablate the Barrett's esophageal epithelium. So basically there are different forms by which you can ablate the esophageal or the abnormal dysplastic Barrett's epithelium, but the most important technique is radiofrequency ablation. The most important factor is radiofrequency ablation. But the disadvantage of endoscopic ablative therapy is the tissue is not available for biopsy. Okay, that's the major disadvantage. Next, coming to endoscopic resection, you are basically resecting the dysplastic epithelium. You are removing the tissue and subjecting them for tissue. So here tissue diagnosis is possible. In endoscopic resection. So do you recommend EET for non-dysplastic Barrett's epithelium? If there's just a Barrett's metaplasia, there's no dysplasia in the Barrett's mucosa, will you want to do an endoscopic eradication therapy? Currently no. So if there's just a Barrett's metaplasia without dysplasia, you have to subject the patient for surveillance. Only if you find dysplasia, then only you need to subject the patient for endoscopic eradication therapy. Moving on, coming to the ACG, AGA, ASG recommendations, there are few important points that you need to know, okay, guidelines that can be asked in your entrances. So the first thing is treatment with PPI to control GERD irrespective of symptoms. Whether the patient has symptoms of GERD or not, the moment the patient has Barrett's metaplasia, you have to put them on PPI to prevent further progression. Very important. The next thing is non-dysplastic Barrett's esophagus, you are not doing anything, you are just monitoring them by doing a surveillance every 3 to 5 years. The surveillance is done by high resolution white light endoscopy. You have to take about 4 quadrant biopsies every 22 cm within suspicious areas throughout the length of Barrett's esophagus, and if there's already an evidence of dysplasia, you have to take the biopsies 1 cm apart. This is very important. Suppose if these biopsy results are indefinite, you have to optimize the patient with PPI and ask a repeat endoscopic biopsy after about 8 weeks, and the biopsy interval should be taken at 1 cm intervals, and if the indefinite results persist, you have to repeat the endoscopic biopsy after 12 months. High grade dysplasia surveillance. So if there's evidence of high grade dysplasia after endoscopic eradication therapy, you have to subject them for surveillance every 3 months for about first year, and then thereafter 6 months in the second year, and annually thereafter. For low grade dysplasia, you have to repeat the endoscopy every 6 months for the first year and then annually thereafter.